So we are continuing with the Genjōkōan, Dōgen's seminal work, and this will be our last reading tonight of it. But we probably won't finish it. I mean, we won't do every section that's remaining. But I want to continue a bit and then also skip to like the last two paragraphs. One thing that we should keep in mind is, of course, that reading teaching that Dōgen gives is a like hearing a Dharma talk. When you're hearing a Dharma talk from a master, we try to put ourselves in a very receptive place, feeling like the words are things that actually change us in a certain way. That the words of Dharma written by Dōgen can enter the heart and make a shift. That's why we read these texts. The intellectual understanding is useful, but it's limited. And the reason we study the Dharma and study the self, as we saw before, is to change our minds and change the way we relate to things around us, so that we can relate to the things around us and relate to ourselves in a more fluid and tolerant and receptive way. And we start to see the connection of ourselves with the things around us. And we start to see how the myriad things, as Dōgen says, emerge in my mind and make me who I am. That I don't walk through life projecting myself onto the world, but rather my path is more to make my way through the world and receive things as they are. So we should also, have, after encountering teachings like this, we should awaken and arouse some deep appreciation and gratitude that teachings have been handed down, and that this practice is here for us. The zazen we do, and the learning, the study of Dōgen, and which ends up being always the study of ourselves. Where am I open? Where am I closed? How do I see things clearly? How am I seeing things really through the filter of my own ideas and expectations? That beautiful analogy: is the boat moving? Am I moving? Is the shore moving? So there's a sense of doubt here, which is a real central part of our approach, and that type of holy doubt, the type of special practice doubt, Dharma doubt, where we doubt the way we take things and understand them, and the way we use that information, and we doubt the ideas that we live our lives and construct ourselves by. That doesn't mean to reject them. Remember, we're not, outright rejecting these ideas. We just want them. We want to understand that, they're coming from us. They're coming from us, and so therefore we should always be trying to adapt them skillfully to each situation. So we can, relate in a way that's of need and not a way that's of greed, less selfish and more altruistic. So we want to relate to the myriad things in the world around us on its terms, not just on ours. And this is, in Dōgen's teaching in many different ways. How can we connect to the world in a way that honors the world and not just, pushes ourselves through it? These are timeless teachings. They're as relevant today as they were, in the 1200s when Dōgen was teaching. And that's why they've maintained their transmission until now. So I think one of the ways we practice with these words is, we read them and we study them, we discuss them and we contemplate them, think about them. But at every moment of the day, you should be thinking yourselves, and we should be thinking ourselves as, on this path. And so we're always reflecting and wondering, how am I living this? How am I living Dharma right now? What's the best way to relate? How can I see things clearly in this situation? So that's a way we can enliven the teachings, so it becomes part of our daily lives. And it's always asking that kind of holy doubt, that question, that great doubt. What's the best way to give in this situation? What's needed here? And am I seeing this clearly? Or am I projecting my ideas onto the situation? Are the myriad things, being realized through me, or am I being realized through the myriad things, as Dōgen says? So I'd like us to go to, I think we're on the second page now. And again, if anyone has a comment or question, just don't wait. This is your chance. So I think we're at the top of the second page. After talking about firewood and ash, we saw enlightenment. Enlightenment is like the moon reflected in the water. The moon does not get wet, nor is the water broken. Although its light is wide and great, the moon is reflected even in a puddle an inch wide. The whole moon and the entire sky are reflected in dewdrops on the grass, or even in one drop of water. Enlightenment does not divide you, just as the moon does not break the water. You cannot hinder enlightenment, just as a drop of water does not hinder the moon in the sky. The depth of the drop is the height of the moon. Each reflection, however long or short its duration, manifests the vastness of the dewdrop and realizes the limitlessness of the moonlight in the sky. This is probably the most poetic paragraph in the Genjōkōan. And the moon and the dewdrop is actually the name of the collection of talks in one of the published books of his. And we can, he uses analogy and metaphor in a way that he hopes, as artists do, that it can capture a truth and transmit the meaning without by bypassing our intellect, so it can immediately access something. And that's what art and metaphor are for. They're for the sake of, directly expressing something as a metaphor. that sometimes explaining it or needing to, extrapolate and expand it in words would miss. It would just pull us farther away from that truth. But to simply give the image of the moon in a dewdrop on a blade of grass, and how the whole moon is reflected in that dewdrop, and the whole sky is reflected in that dewdrop. And if you look closely, you see everything, the whole world in that dewdrop. And it's a tiny little drop on one blade of grass. And yet everything is in that drop. Everything is reflected in that drop. That metaphor simply captures, the whole essence of Buddha nature and enlightenment in one image. And that's Dogen's genius here, is that he's able to capture that in a beautiful way, in a way that is not so common, but not out of reach, not impossible for us to relate to, and perhaps even see one day. Next time you're walking around in the early morning, you see the dew, take a close look. But the moon and the dewdrop, the whole moon and the whole sky reflected in it. So this is the one of the basic tenets of, you could say, faith in the Mahayana and in Zen, is that all sentient beings equally have Buddha nature. And the world, in fact, for Dōgen, he goes beyond. Dogen's like a super Mahayana. He goes beyond sentient beings, and he talks, especially in the Mountains and Rivers Sutra, he writes about worlds and Buddhas in grass and trees and mountains and water and all sorts of things, the whole world, not only sentient beings, which is quite even a departure from the normal understanding. So here we have this message of greatness and of enlightenment. And no matter how small the form, the whole sky and the whole moon are in that form. So we can take that and understand that as an analogy in any way we want to. But we can look at all sentient beings and all beings and all things that exist. And when we understand, they reflect perfectly the greatness of this, way. And that each in its own appearance and each in its own existence expresses the enlightened way. And that's an amazing and remarkable and also very inviting consciousness. And yet that's the awakening, the great awakening. Then in one of the accounts in Zen of the Buddha's awakening, his first statement was that I and all beings on this world are enlightened, are simultaneously enlightened. And that was the Zen take on the Buddha's enlightenment. I and all beings on this world are equally enlightened. So with that, the Buddha's awakening was the recognition of the moon and the dewdrop, of the all things reflect equally the great truth of nirvana. So we see this in this poetic statement in Dōgen, and and there's the middle of this paragraph is also a very important statement that we should pay attention to, when he states, You cannot hinder enlightenment. Now he's speaking directly to us. You cannot hinder, you cannot make it less. You know, your actions, if they're harmful, may delay and limit your own awareness and realization of this great way and the reflection of the moon in your own mind. You may put clouds over the moon, over the sky. You know, your actions may cast clouds over the sky so that you do not see the moon. But you cannot change the moon. You will not hinder, you can't harm or get in the way of enlightenment, he said. You cannot hinder enlightenment. Just as a drop of water does not hinder the moon in the sky. You know, that water may be impure, that water may be like dirty, or it may be, you know, not clear. It may not be clear water, but it's not going to change the nature of the moon in the sky, and the moon is still touching that water, reflected in that water, even if you can't see it. So this is another statement of faith, you could say, of Mahayana faith, that all beings are Buddha. And as Hakuin said, you know, just as all ice is naturally water, all beings are naturally Buddha. And this is Dōgen stating it in this way. There's nothing we can do to change the fact that we are naturally awakened and enlightened and have the same Buddha nature as all beings and all things. You know, that is the great leveler and the great unifier, is this awakening, enlightenment, and perfection that all creatures, beings, and people have. And that is the amazing acknowledgement to make. That is the greatness of the way. That wherever you go, you're meeting Buddha. You may not realize it, and they may not realize it, but this is what the moon reflected in the water is expressing. To remind ourselves of that truth is to look around at the world as a Buddha land, and not as just a figment of our imagination. But if you need to believe in something, to believe that all creatures and all beings are Buddha will lead you in the right direction of respect and non-harm. Because you don't want to harm a Buddha. So remember, all of this awakening and awareness that we are cultivating and discussing, and Dōgen is writing about, is about cultivating a certain moral behavior and way in life that is not just abstract and aesthetic. It's not just an aesthetic realization and a poetic one, but it has real world implications. Those implications are how we then relate to all this Buddha, you know, and all this awakening and enlightenment. So that we see, even if he's not only speaking to us, he's saying you cannot hinder enlightenment, just as the water doesn't change the moon. Right? So too does everybody who we find, you know, we think is causing harm. So too they cannot hinder enlightenment. Their path may be longer of their own realization, but it is our responsibility as practitioners and people following the Dharma and practicing to see Buddha everywhere we go. Not as something that covers over and ignores harmful actions that sentient beings may do, especially to one another. But to understand that within that sentient being is the same Buddha nature that all beings have. Is the same enlightened consciousness that can be awakened. Otherwise, there's no hope. Yeah, there's no hope. like people are just going to be bad. But that's simply, you know, that's fixing an identity.
I have a question, Daniel. You kind of answered it when you said in relation to the line, you cannot hinder enlightenment, but that the water itself can be unclear, or the sky can be too clouded to witness the moon that is, already reflected. And this seems to me like, at least in this text, the emphasis is really not so much on practice, but on the way things already are. So in a previous line where he says that Buddhas not necessarily recognize themselves as such. I was wondering about what you think about the general sentiment of the text, if it is more kind of his take on the truth of things, or like I don't know what I'm asking, but like it doesn't seem to, like, for instance, the evening gata or other sources that really emphasize the urgency of practice. Doesn't seem.
Yeah, I think it's true that you're pointing out something accurate, that here it's more descriptive and not proscriptive, that he's describing reality as he understands reality. You can even say ontological, like this is the way it is, this is reality he's describing. And he's not telling us what to do with it other than accept it. There's a sort of acceptance here, and a type of perhaps just letting this awareness sit. It's not wanting to actively change yourself, because that active changing is simply artificial, right? Changing what? You're just changing the surfaces. You're not changing the core. So yeah, I think it's more descriptive here. Is more descriptive. He's describing what he sees, what he's seen, and what he's seen around him. He's describing his awareness and understanding him. And yeah, he's not really telling us what to do with it, other than the implication was implied of, accept it. Accept it. Yeah. Yeah, so whereas, in the earlier works where he's talking about Zazen, like Fukan Zazenji, the recommending Zazen for all people, one of his earlier texts, he's definitely telling us like how to practice, what to do, where to sit, what to do with your breath and your mind, that sort of stuff. Okay, and what ideas to even let go of. But he's here, he's kind of describing what, if you have right view, this is what you'll see. But I want to mention though that, okay, here we have, I want to look at the next paragraph for a second, because I was thinking about it while you just spoke here. When Dharma does not fill your whole body and mind, you think it is already sufficient. When the Dharma fills your body and mind, you understand that something is missing. It's a really interesting statement. Let's continue for a bit, and then we'll wonder what it means. For example, when you sail out in a boat in the midst of an ocean where no land is in sight, and view the four directions, the ocean looks circular and does not look any other way. But the ocean is neither round nor square. Its features are infinite in variety. It is like a palace. It is like a jewel. It only looks circular as far as you can see at that time. All things are like this. Though there are many features in the dusty world and the world beyond conditions, you see and understand only what your eye of practice can reach. In order to learn the nature of the myriad things, you must know that although they may look round or square, the other features of oceans and mountains are infinite in variety. Whole worlds are there. It is so not only around you, but also directly beneath your feet or in a drop of water. So here we do have something that is a little more prescriptive, a bit of, describing not only what an approach we should have, but also an approach we shouldn't have. First of all, he's saying, like, when you think you know, you don't know, right? That's an important thing. And that's a very common thread in especially Zen. That sense of not knowing. Not knowing is key. Not knowing isn't like a false humility and a false insecurity of saying, oh, I don't know. It's more a deep approach of always wanting to look again. I've always wanted to look again, of being an explorer. Yeah. And never taking my ideas for granted. So that's why he says, if it fills your body and mind, then you know always something is missing. What's missing keeps me looking. It's not that I need, to fill something in me. It's that I realize that my point of view is always partial. It's always limited, my point of view. So what's missing is that I need to understand more. I need more points of view. This talk may mean one thing, it may mean something else. I have to keep looking and keep wondering. You may seem like one person, but I need to keep looking and hearing you, because you're going to shift and seem different. Things are going to change. So when I really absorb the Dharma, it's that sense of not knowing. As he says, something's always missing, meaning missing in my perspective. My perspective is missing something. It's missing, all the other infinite perspective. If things are changing infinitely and there's an infinite world in every dewdrop, meaning everything has a lot of different sides to them. People, things, trees, dogs, dewdrops, buses, a lot of different sides, okay? And because everything keeps changing, even those sides keep changing. And that's why he says, they are infinite in variety. And every day, because you're different and time is different, so you walk down the same street or see the same mountain or same car, and that's changed as well. So there's always something missing if I'm aware of the Dharma, meaning I have to keep awake and looking and observing to appreciate all those varieties that the world is appearing in. And that infinite variety of even one thing will allow me to appreciate in a much greater way and let go of my fixed ideas. Because I have to keep looking, and my perspective, I need to always recognize that something's missing. Missing in my understanding, in my Daniel limited self point of view. from the Buddha nature point of view, nothing's missing. Okay, it's all naturally perfect and complete. But if I am pursuing the path and I let it, infuse, as he says, when it fills your body and mind, I let it fill my body and mind. I realize that my body and mind are limited, that there's something missing. So this is a real invitation, an invitation to keep alert and open to all the varieties that even one thing has. And if only one thing, then all things. Yeah. So here we're having a description of life that is incredibly rich because of the truth of impermanence. The truth of impermanence keeps things changing, and the varieties keep appearing of the same thing. The variety of myself, of others, of the dewdrop, of the mountains, of the sounds, of the time of day, of everything that is constantly shifting. The sands are shifting, the ground is shifting as I stand on it, and I need to keep observing. And through that, commitment and letting the Dharma fill my body and mind, I'm able to say that I don't know. And that not knowing is coming from a place of confidence in the Buddha nature of all things. I can rest in reality because I know it has that essential nature. And from that place of confidence, I can look around and appreciate all the changing sands and keep observing without feeling like it's, creating insecurity. This is, the big vision I'm saying, not, an immediate thing that happens. But this is the vision that Dōgen is describing. And here we do have something a bit prescriptive, where he is telling us, you do need to let go of some of your fixed views. And if you want the Dharma to fill your body and mind, if you really want to be on the path, it's accepting that everything is changing is changing and has a lot of variety to it. And what looks the same is only the same because you are projecting your ideas onto it. But if you were to let the Dharma fill your body and mind, you'd be able to say something's missing in what I see. I'm not seeing it clearly enough. That's the doubt. That something missing is just the great doubt. The great doubt. One of the things that is beautiful in Dogen's writings and teachings is that he always goes from the really big picture of the world and the mountains to, as he says here in this last line of that paragraph, it's also not only around you, but directly beneath your feet, right in the dewdrop, right on the stone you're standing on, right on the seat on your cushion. It's right beneath your feet. It's right here. It's right your breath. It's so intimate. So, to study the Buddha way is to study the self. You're studying, you're observing, you're appreciating, you're opening to, and you're accepting the shifts and the changing perspectives and points of view moment by moment in your own, personal experience. And that doesn't mean you can't know anything, right? That I just can't make a statement about anything. Like, hey, I've got a piece of paper here, you know, I've got a screen in front of me, I can see these things. You know, I've got a wall that I can touch, and, you know, I'm wearing glasses. I mean, I can make these statements. It would be foolish to say, oh, I can't see, I can't know anything. No, I can know and at the same time not know. There's this, you know, unity of opposites here. That there's sort of a small self knowing and my big self not knowing. Okay? So we function skillfully in the world by knowing, and at the same time, we can rest in the great unknowing. That I don't need to be right. That it's not about proving anything. And that things will change as soon as I think I know them. And that can allow me to be much more adaptable to these changing conditions. So that if you need to know, then all knowing that you have is very temporary and only as skillful as it's helpful for that situation. And then when it's time to change your view, you change it in order to adapt well to the next need. So, skipping a couple of paragraphs because I want to just go to the last two paragraphs of the Genjōkōan to finish our reading. So on the last page, here is the place. Here the way unfolds. The boundary of realization is not distinct, where the realization comes forth simultaneously with the mastery of the Buddha Dharma. Do not suppose that what you realize becomes your knowledge and is grasped by your consciousness. Although actualized immediately, it is inconceivable. The inconceivable may not be distinctly apparent. Its appearance is beyond your knowledge. This again is going back to what you said, Jonathan, that, you know, although you may be a Buddha, you may not know you're a Buddha. We have a strong bias towards our intellectual grasping and understanding, because that's how we make our identity. And here it's quite the opposite, that, you know, no matter how much you try to grasp it, it's ungraspable. It's inconceivable. You cannot conceive of it, because to conceive of it is conception is to make it into an idea. You know, talk about enlightenment, nirvana, to talk about freedom and liberation, to talk about, you know, the Buddha nature, are conceptions that can lead us in the wrong direction, that make us think we understand and grasp something, when really it's dynamic, changing, open, and always, you know, with infinite variety. If it has infinite variety, as Dōgen described, one dewdrop, then how could we ever grasp what and understand, you know, what this greatness is? Inconceivable. So that is a sense of, although it may seem, well, then how do I approach it? That's the point. It's not something you approach or even need to think about. No, this is not an idea we need to come and say, I got it. Did you get it? Yeah, I got it, I understood. I've grasped it completely. No. This is Dōgen reassuring us that the great way is manifesting in your life without you having to prove it by coming up with a really good way to talk about it or describe it. But it's an approach that will open your heart without having to, be translated into a specific idea. But there is that statement, here is the way, here is the place, here the way unfolds. If we could fully take that to heart, that it's nothing, beyond, that it's also not in some sort of special practice, some kind of experience. Here is the place, here it unfolds. Whatever your here is, and the here is always changing. So whatever the here is, that's where the great way is unfolding. That is where the great way is unfolding. If you can fully embrace that here, if you can fully embrace that statement, you will be paying attention to how the great way unfolds in this very moment. Whether it's listening to a Dharma talk, whether it's riding on the bus, whether it's sweeping leaves, or whether it's chopping onions, whether it's sitting on the toilet, or whether it's finally lying down in bed. At the end of the day, here the way unfolds. This is the place. Can we fully open ourselves to that possibility? That's what makes the great way great, is that it's all places and all times. Finally, our last paragraph, where he brings in a master, an old master. Then Master Bauk of Mount Mayu was fanning himself. A monk approached and said, "Master, the nature of wind is permanent, and there is no place it does not reach. Why then do you fan yourself?" It's a metaphor. They're talking in metaphors. They do that. He's fanning himself. And the fanning is sort of the practice of the great way, doing some activity to cultivate the great way. And then the student comes and says, "The great way is everywhere. The great way is everywhere. It's in all things. So why do you practice? Why are you practicing? Why do you need to practice do zazen? Why do you need to follow the precepts and stuff if the great way is everywhere? The wind, the nature of the wind is permanent. Like the great way, Buddha nature and enlightenment is all places, all times. As Dōgen said, here is the place, here it unfolds. If that's true, then anything I do is an expression of the great way. So why fan yourself? Why practice? Why are you adding wind when there's wind everywhere? The fan is adding wind, right? Meaning I'm practicing. But why do I need to practice? Why do I need to do meditation and study the Dharma if the great way is all things and all times and everywhere? It's already fully realized. So why would I need to add any practice to it? Isn't that just redundant? And the master answers, "Although you understand that the nature of wind is permanent," Byaku replied, "you do not understand the meaning of its reaching everywhere." So he says, although you understand that the great way is everywhere, okay, the nature of Buddha nature is all things, right? That's the nature of wind is permanent. That, it's all things are enlightened. Okay, you understand that intellectually. But you don't understand that it reaches everywhere, the wind reaches everywhere. Meaning, how do we realize that? Yeah, you understand that Buddha nature is everywhere, but you don't understand how the realization is made of that. How do we as individuals realize it? That's what Bayoku is saying. You don't understand that, he said to his student. You understand, you can say, yeah, all things are but in nature. Okay. So far, so good. But do you understand how individually we realize that in our own lives? That's, the wind reaching everywhere. Does it reach you as an individual? Does it reach you when you wake up in the middle of the night? Does it reach you when you get up in the morning? Does it reach you? Meaning, are you realizing it in every moment? That's what he asked the student. You understand the idea, but you didn't get the individual, personal realization. So then the student asked, the monk asked, what is the meaning of it reaching everywhere? The monk asked. Asked the monk again. The master just kept fanning himself, meaning the master just kept practicing. Like, it's not something to explain. What does it mean to realize it individually, that Buddha nature is everywhere, that I can realize it, you can realize it, we all can realize it? That's not something to explain. The practice, the fanning, the sitting, the practicing is the explanation. And this is Dogen's, basic approach of practice enlightenment, he calls it. That practice and enlightenment are one. You want to realize Buddha nature, you practice. You practice. Okay, and that's the master Bayoki fanning himself. Even though it's all over and everywhere, so what do you need to practice for? No, that's how I realize it. I realize it through practice. The master just kept fanning himself. The monk bowed deeply. And then Dōgen then now gives his understanding. The actualization of the Buddha Dharma, the vital path of its correct transmission, is like this. It's like that. If you say you do not need to fan yourself because the nature of the wind is permanent and you can have the wind without fanning, you will understand neither permanence nor the nature of the wind. Okay? Meaning, if you say that you don't need to practice because Buddha nature and enlightenment is everywhere in every dewdrop and is right beneath my feet and here's the way and here the way unfolds. If you say because of that I don't need to practice, like I just live my life, then you don't understand Buddha nature and you don't understand practice. The nature of the wind is permanent because of that. The wind of the Buddha's house brings forth the gold of the earth and makes fragrant the cream of the long river. Okay, Dogen's poetic words finish his text, and he gives us the final statement of saying, yeah, the nature of the wind is permanent, meaning all things are Buddha in nature. All things are naturally enlightened. And that gives life its deepest meaning. Accepting that as a basic approach will simply change the way I look around at the world. But he ends his Genjōkōan reminding us that that doesn't happen by itself. That appreciation, that realization happens through constant practice. That's Master Bayoki fanning himself. There's Buddha nature, there's the wind. The wind only reaches all places, meaning Buddha nature is only realized by all beings through constant practice. And this is how Dōgen finishes his Genjōkōan, by reminding us through this koan, this specific koan, which is one of the koans, of the necessity of practice in order to realize this great way, which is what we do. So Does anyone have a comment or any question before we sit for a bit to finish our evening?
Just maybe a little technical question, like about the terminology. When he says Buddha Dharma, how do you take it? Is it like the path or reality itself, or both, or neither?
Yeah, when he says about the actualization of the Buddha Dharma, the vital path of correct transmission. Yeah, it's the teachings of the Buddha and its practice. So it's the Buddha Dharma Sangha. It's the triple gem. It's the teachings. Okay, it's the Buddha, the teacher, the teachings, and the practice. So yeah, it's the teachings and its practice, the Buddha Dharma. I mean, it's really the great way, we say. You know, the great way is Buddha Dharma. But it's, you know, living your life according to the Dharma. So yeah, that's the Buddha Dharma, is the teachings that have been transmitted by the Buddha through all the teachers. So yeah, as a way of life. So it's not just reality. It's not reality. It's reality as a form of practice in order to have full realization. Reality is the place where we practice. Okay, we practice, and our practice is informed and guided by the Dharma. And so that practice through the teachings is Buddha Dharma. The world itself, if we were just to describe the world, it would be, you know, samsara and nirvana. That's you know, what the world is. The unrealized world is samsara. The realized world is nirvana. The way to transform samsara into nirvana is through the practice of the Buddha Dharma. Usually, in conventional ways, the Buddha Dharma means the teachings of the Buddha.
Daniel, this is actually the main thing that people today speak in spiritual circles, that you don't have to do anything. Since you're already awake and you're already Buddha, and everybody, this is one of the things that today the practice seems not so important for some reason, actually. A lot of people speak like that. You don't have to do anything. I don't know if you encountered that or not. But it's what it.
Yeah.
You say you don't need to because you're already awake. Everything is already perfect. You don't have to do anything.
Yeah, that can be a certain one-sided understanding of some of these teachings. You know, the Mahayana teaching of all things are Buddha Dharma, reflected in every dewdrop and everything. That's true, but as he said very clearly, if the Buddha Dharma fills your body and mind, then you realize something's missing. You see, Dogen gives us a sort of an antidote to that delusion that I don't need to do anything. He says, if you really are practicing, you realize there's always more to do. It's quite helpful. Because the problem with thinking that everything is perfect and the Dharma is already correctly transmitted is that there's not much room for then the practice of compassion, because you don't need to, there's no need to help. Like, people's suffering is also perfect. So that's the problem there. It takes away the paramita it takes away the Brahma Vihara of compassion.
So the main purpose of the practice is compassion.
It's ending suffering. And compassion allows us to recognize suffering and to want to end it. As the Buddha said famously, I teach one thing and one thing only, suffering and the end of suffering. So keeping that in mind, then, on the meta level, on the level of wisdom and emptiness, yeah, everything's perfect and already transmitted. But on the relative truth level of people like suffering and dukkha, the first noble truth, dukkha, there's work to be done. And the Bodhisattva, vows to do that work.
Yeah.
So we have to, in some way, we need to combine relative and absolute truth of form and emptiness. Talking about like living on the realm of emptiness, where everything is fully realized, is only half of the moon. The other half of the moon is, the dark side of the moon. The dark side of the moon is where there's all sorts of forms that are in trouble. So, if you want the moon to be full, it has to include both the bright and the dark side.
That's a good example.
So let us finish with a minute to sit together and to appreciate the silence and the opportunity we've had to study some of Dōgen together as a process, and hopefully we'll continue on our own in our own ways to practice. So let's sit for a minute and breathe in, breathe out. And I usually end the evenings with a dedication. And we dedicate our Dharma evening and teachings and whatever wisdom we may have gained to strengthening our practice so that we may be of benefit to all those around us. So we live our lives in a more compassionate and wise way. May these teachings guide us, and may our practice be true, so that I may find my great way here and now,